Tonight, we're diving into one of history's most fascinating yet terrifying periods, the Golden Age of Piracy, roughly spanning from 1650 to 1730. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to this channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You wake not to an alarm clock, but to the sound of waves lapping against a hull that's seen better decades. The year is 1718, and you found yourself aboard a pirate vessel, though the path that brought you here was likely paved with few other choices. Perhaps you were a merchant sailor whose ship was captured, given the choice between joining or being marooned on some godforsaken spit of sand. Maybe you were a former naval man, discharged without pay or pension after years of service to a crown that barely acknowledged your existence. The morning light filters through whatever small porthole might grace your sleeping quarters, though calling them quarters is generous. More likely, you're wedged between barrels of hardtack and coils of rope that smell of tar and decades of salt spray. Your hammock, if you're fortunate enough to have one, sways with each movement of the ship, a motion that newcomers find nauseating, but which old hands barely notice anymore. The first sensation that greets you isn't the gentle warmth of morning sun, but the persistent ache in your back from sleeping on surfaces that were never designed for human comfort. Every joint protests as you unfold yourself from whatever position allowed you a few hours of rest. Your clothes, the same ones you've worn for weeks now, cling to your skin with a mixture of sweat, salt, and grime that forms its own ecosystem. The smell hits you next. It's not just unwashed bodies, though that's certainly part of it. It's the sweet, sick scent of rotting wood in the lower decks, mixed with bilge water that no amount of pumping can entirely eliminate. There's the acrid bite of gunpowder residue, the metallic tang of rust on iron fittings, and underneath it all, the omnipresent smell of the sea itself. Not the clean, fresh ocean breeze of vacation memories, but the working sea, full of seaweed, dead fish, and the general funk of an ecosystem doing its business. Your stomach rumbles, but experience has taught you not to get your hopes up about breakfast. Food aboard a pirate ship follows the brutal mathematics of supply and demand, and supply is always uncertain. The ship's stores were likely pillaged from previous conquests, supplemented by whatever could be hunted, gathered, or purchased during brief stops at ports that didn't ask too many questions about a ship's provenance. As you make your way above deck, your bare feet, shoes being a luxury that few pirates enjoyed for long, feel every splinter and rough edge of planking that's been worn smooth by countless other feet, but never quite smooth enough. The wood is already warm from the Caribbean sun, promising another day of sweltering heat with no escape except the occasional spray of seawater over the bow. The deck stretches before you, perhaps 100 feet from bow to stern if you're aboard one of the larger vessels, though most pirate ships were considerably smaller, converted merchant vessels or captured sloops that prioritized speed over space. Every inch serves multiple purposes. The same area where you might eat your meager breakfast doubles as a workplace for sail repair, a sleeping space during storms, and a battlefield if things go poorly during an engagement. Your fellow pirates are already stirring, each emerging from their own uncomfortable resting places. There's Willem, the Dutch sailor whose left arm ends just below the elbow, lost not in some dramatic sword fight, but to infection after a rope burn went untreated for too long. There's Mary, disguised as a man named Mark, whose secret isn't really secret, but whose skill with a cutlass earned her a place among the crew regardless. And there's old Tom, who's probably not yet 40 but looks 60, his skin leathered by decades of tropical sun, and his teeth reduced to a handful of yellowed stumps. Each face tells a story of survival, of choices made from limited options, of adaptations to circumstances that would break softer people. These aren't the dashing rogues of popular imagination, but there's something perhaps more remarkable: ordinary people who've learned to thrive in extraordinary circumstances. The ship's bell might mark the hour, though time aboard a pirate vessel follows different rhythms than the regulated schedules of merchant ships or naval vessels. There are no formal watches in the military sense, no rigid hierarchies that can't be questioned. Instead, there's a kind of organized chaos that somehow keeps the ship functioning, sails trimmed, and course maintained. Captain Morrison, or whatever name he's using this month, emerges from his cabin, which is larger than anyone else's quarters, but still barely big enough for a man to stand upright. His coat, once fine, now bears the stains and patches of hard use, but he wears it with the dignity of someone who understands that authority at sea depends as much on perception as on actual power. His position isn't guaranteed by royal commission or company charter, but by the daily consent of men who could vote him out if he fails to deliver results. The morning ritual begins with the pumping of the bilge, an unglamorous but essential task that prevents the ship from slowly sinking under the weight of water that seeps through her hull. It's backbreaking work, operating the wooden pump handles in teams, feeling the resistance as water grudgingly gives up its hold on the ship's belly. Your hands, already tough with calluses, still blister from the constant friction of rope and wood against palm and finger. As you work, you can hear the conversations that flow around the ship like water itself. There's planning for the day ahead. Should you make for that small island visible on the horizon where fresh water might be found? Should you risk approaching that merchant vessel whose sails appeared yesterday evening? Is it worth investigating that smoke on the northern horizon, which might indicate a settlement? Or should you assume it's a naval patrol and give it wide berth? These discussions happen in a mixture of languages that would confuse any landlubber. English, certainly, but also Spanish, French, Dutch, Portuguese, and various Creole languages that developed in ports where different cultures mixed and merged. Many pirates spoke 3 or 4 languages out of necessity, not from formal education, but from the practical requirements of international criminality. Take a moment here to appreciate the complexity of the world these people navigated. I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Drop a comment below and let us know how you're finding this journey so far. The sun climbs higher, and with it comes the heat that will define the next several hours. By mid-morning, the deck is too hot to touch with bare skin, and the metal fittings become instruments of torture for anyone careless enough to brush against them. There's no shade, except what can be created by stretching canvas between masts and rigging, a process that requires constant adjustment as the ship changes course and the sun moves across the sky. Water, fresh water, becomes the most precious commodity aboard. Each person might receive a pint per day if supplies are good, perhaps half that if they're running low. This water, stored in wooden casks for weeks or months, tastes of wood and algae, with a faint chemical tang from whatever was used to treat the barrels. You learn to drink it slowly, savoring each mouthful, not for pleasure, but for the life it represents. The ocean surrounds you with more water than could supply a city, but every drop is poison to human life. Salt water, consumed in desperation, only accelerates dehydration and death. Some old hands claim they can make seawater drinkable by distilling it over fires, but the fuel required makes this impractical except in the most desperate circumstances. Your clothing, such as it is, offers little protection from the sun. Most pirates wore whatever they could acquire, trade, or steal, resulting in outfits that were practical rather than fashionable. Loose linen shirts, if you were lucky enough to have one, provided some protection while allowing air circulation. Wide-brimmed hats were treasured items, often decorated not from vanity but to make them easily identifiable. Losing your hat overboard meant facing the tropical sun with no protection except whatever shade you could improvise. The work aboard ship never truly stops. Sails need constant adjustment as winds shift. Rigging requires daily inspection and repair. A snapped line at the wrong moment could mean losing a mast, leaving the ship helpless in hostile waters. The deck needs regular scraping and caulking to prevent rot, though with limited supplies, this maintenance often involved creative solutions using whatever materials were available. Food preparation happens in whatever space can be cleared, using implements that serve multiple purposes. A sword might become a cooking knife. A marlin spike could open barrels or hold meat over a fire. The ship's cook, if there was one, worked with ingredients that would challenge the most creative chef. Salt pork so hard it needed soaking before it could be chewed, hardtack biscuits that were often more weevil than wheat, and whatever could be caught from the sea or gathered during brief shore visits. Fishing from a moving ship requires skills that landlubbers never develop. It's not the peaceful contemplation of riverside angling, but urgent work with nets and lines, trying to supplement meager stores with whatever the sea might provide. Flying fish, attracted by the ship's lights at night, sometimes landed on deck like gifts from Providence. Seabirds, when they could be caught, provided not just meat but feathers for various uses and bones that could be carved into tools. The hierarchy aboard a pirate ship was unlike anything found in legitimate maritime service. While there was usually a captain, his authority was limited and constantly subject to review by the crew. Major decisions, where to sail, what ships to attack, how to divide loot, were often made democratically, with every man having a voice. This wasn't idealism, but practicality. Men facing constant danger and hardship wouldn't follow someone they didn't respect or trust. Articles of agreement, written contracts that governed behavior aboard ship, covered everything from the division of spoils to compensation for injuries received in battle. These documents, when they survived, reveal communities that were remarkably egalitarian for their time, with provisions for disability compensation, democratic decision-making, and even early forms of workers' compensation. Yet this democracy had its limits. Discipline, when necessary, could be swift and brutal. A man who endangered the ship through cowardice or incompetence might find himself marooned with nothing but a pistol containing a single shot, officially to defend himself, but everyone understood its true purpose. Theft from fellow crew members was often punishable by death, as was desertion in the face of battle. The afternoon heat becomes a living thing, pressing down on the ship like a smothering blanket. You've learned to move differently in this heat. Slowly, deliberately, conserving energy for when it's truly needed. The smart pirates have found ways to create shade or work in the shadows of sails and rigging, but there's only so much relief to be found on a wooden platform surrounded by endless miles of sun-reflected ocean. Your skin tells the story of months at sea. Even if you started with a complexion suited to gentler climates, the tropical sun has worked its will upon you. Sunburn gives way to painful peeling, which eventually yields to a leathery tan that offers some protection but comes at the cost of premature aging. Pirates often look decades older than their actual years, their faces carved by wind and weather into maps of hard experience. The clothing you wear has been modified by necessity and creativity born of desperation. That linen shirt has been patched with canvas, leather, or whatever fabric could be salvaged from other garments. Your trousers, originally white or natural colored, now bear stains that tell stories. Rust from iron fittings, tar from rope work, blood from various encounters, both violent and accidental, and the general grime of a life lived without adequate washing facilities. Personal hygiene presents challenges that modern minds struggle to comprehend. Bathing means jumping overboard when conditions permit, which is risky business even for strong swimmers. The ocean currents that make the Caribbean so beautiful also make it dangerous. A man swept away from his ship might as well have jumped into the void of space. Even when bathing is possible, soap is a luxury rarely available, and salt water leaves skin feeling sticky and uncomfortable as it dries. Dental care consists of whatever can be improvised. Some pirates chewed on certain woods or plants believed to clean teeth, while others used frayed rope ends as primitive toothbrushes. More commonly, dental problems were simply endured until they became life-threatening, at which point the affected tooth was extracted using whatever tools were available, often by the ship's carpenter, who had the most experience with precise cutting implements. The ship's carpenter held a position of critical importance that extended far beyond woodworking. In addition to maintaining the vessel's structure, he often served as the closest thing to a surgeon available. Battle wounds, accidental injuries, and the various ailments that plagued men living in close quarters all fell under his care. His tools, saws, chisels, knives, served double duty for both construction and crude medical procedures. Medicine aboard a pirate ship was a mixture of folk wisdom, desperate improvisation, and practices that would horrify modern healthcare workers. Wounds were cleaned with whatever alcohol was available, not from any understanding of antisepsis, but because experience had shown that spirits seemed to prevent some infections. Broken bones were set using splints made from whatever wood could be spared, often leaving the victim with permanent disabilities if the break was severe. Common ailments included scurvy, caused by the lack of fresh vegetables and fruits in the ship's diet. This disease began with fatigue and joint pain, but progressed to bleeding gums, loose teeth, and wounds that wouldn't heal. Pirates who understood the connection between diet and scurvy made efforts to obtain citrus fruits during port visits, but this knowledge wasn't universal, and fresh provisions were often consumed quickly in the heat. Dysentery and other gastrointestinal ailments were constant companions aboard ship, caused by contaminated water, spoiled food, and poor sanitation. The ship's heads, primitive toilet facilities, were located at the bow, where spray from the ship's movement provided the only cleaning mechanism. Privacy was non-existent, and using these facilities during rough weather required both courage and acrobatic skill. Sleep, when it could be achieved, came in whatever space could be claimed. Hammocks were preferred by those who could obtain them, as they moved with the ship's motion rather than fighting it. But hammocks required secure anchor points and enough space to swing freely, luxuries that weren't always available. More often, pirates slept on coils of rope, folded canvas, or simply the deck itself, using whatever they could find for cushioning and warmth. The tropical nights that seem so romantic in modern tourism were experienced quite differently by men sleeping on an open deck. While the temperature was usually comfortable, the humidity made everything feel damp and clammy. Dew formed on every surface, soaking through whatever clothing or covering might provide protection. Flying insects, attracted by human warmth and the smell of unwashed bodies, made sleep a constant battle against buzzing, biting tormentors. Weather presented challenges that went far beyond mere discomfort. Caribbean storms could appear with little warning, transforming a manageable sea into a chaos of wind and water that threatened to tear the ship apart. When storms struck, all hands worked frantically to secure everything that could move, reduce sail area to prevent the masts from being torn away, and somehow keep the vessel pointed in a direction that wouldn't result in being rolled over by massive waves. During these storms, the distinction between crew members disappeared entirely. Captain and cabin boy worked side by side, their lives equally dependent on keeping the ship afloat. Water crashed over the sides with enough force to knock a man unconscious, and everyone learned to move with one hand always gripping something solid. The pumps worked constantly during storms as the ship's hull flexed and strained, opening seams that let the ocean slowly claim the vessel inch by inch. If you're still with me on this journey, I hope you're finding some peace in these stories of people who faced each day with courage born of necessity. Take a moment to like this video if you're enjoying it, and don't forget to subscribe for more historical adventures that help us understand how people lived, survived, and thrived in times very different from our own. The aftermath of storms brought its own challenges. Rigging that had snapped needed replacement, often using whatever materials could be improvised from the ship's stores. Sails torn by fierce winds required patching with whatever fabric was available, creating patchwork patterns that told the story of each vessel's encounters with nature's fury. Water that had entered the ship during the storm needed to be pumped out, a process that could take days if the storm had been particularly severe. Navigation in the age of piracy was an art form that combined scientific knowledge with intuitive understanding of sea and weather patterns. Most pirates weren't trained navigators in the formal sense, but they learned to read the signs that surrounded them, the color and behavior of water, the patterns of clouds, the flight of seabirds, and the subtle changes in wind direction that could indicate approaching weather or nearby land. The instruments available were basic by any standard. A compass, if the ship possessed one, might be accurate or might be influenced by iron fittings and cargo that created magnetic anomalies. Charts, when available, were often crude approximations based on secondhand information. with errors that could place an island miles from its actual location. Depth sounding was accomplished by dropping a weighted line overboard and hoping to reach bottom before running out of rope. Dead reckoning, estimating position based on direction traveled and distance covered, required constant attention to multiple variables. Speed through water was estimated by throwing a floating object overboard and timing how quickly the ship passed it, or by using a more sophisticated device called a log line, which was marked with knots at regular intervals. These measurements were only as accurate as the person making them, and errors accumulated over time. The search for fresh water drove many decisions about where to sail and what risks to take. Islands that appeared on no chart might harbor springs or streams that could refill the ship's water casks, but approaching unknown land meant risking running aground on hidden reefs or encountering hostile inhabitants who saw armed strangers as threats to be eliminated. When fresh water was found, the process of filling casks and transporting them back to the ship was labor-intensive and dangerous. Men had to be left on shore to guard the water party, reducing the ship's defensive capability. The heavy casks had to be rowed out to the ship in small boats, a process that left everyone involved vulnerable to sudden changes in weather or the appearance of hostile vessels. Food procurement followed similar patterns of opportunity and risk. Hunting on islands could provide fresh meat, but it also meant splitting the crew and making noise that might attract unwanted attention. Fishing was safer, but less reliable, depending on location, season, and simple luck. Trade with local populations was possible, but required trust that was often in short supply when dealing with armed pirates. The social dynamics aboard a pirate ship created both remarkable solidarity and potentially explosive tensions. Men, thrown together by circumstance rather than choice, had to find ways to coexist in conditions that would challenge any community. Disputes over work assignments, food distribution, sleeping arrangements, and personal property had to be resolved quickly before they threatened the safety of everyone aboard. Some ships developed elaborate systems of justice and compensation that would be recognizable to modern labor organizers. Work was divided as fairly as possible, with rotation of unpleasant duties and recognition that some men were better suited to certain tasks than others. Injuries received in the course of ship's business were compensated from common funds, with specific amounts set aside for different types of wounds or disabilities. Yet beneath this cooperation lay the constant tension of men who knew they were living outside society's laws and protection. Trust was essential for survival, but paranoia was often justified. A crew member who decided to claim a reward for turning in his companions could destroy everyone, making every port visit a calculated risk and every new addition to the crew a potential threat. The morning sun brings with it the endless calculations that keep you alive another day. You've awakened to the sound of feet on deck above. Someone spotted something on the horizon, and the easy rhythm of routine is about to shift into the focused intensity that comes with potential opportunity or danger. In the pirate's world, these are often the same thing. Your body has learned to read the ship's moods through your bones and muscles. The change in her motion tells you that someone has adjusted the sails, probably to change course for a closer look at whatever caught the lookout's attention. The subtle shift in how the deck tilts beneath your feet speaks of wind changes and the captain's decision to investigate rather than avoid. Above deck, the morning light reveals a distant speck that could be another vessel. The process of identification begins immediately. Friend or foe, predator or prey, opportunity or trap. Everyone aboard understands that this moment could determine whether the day ends with celebration or catastrophe, whether you'll sleep tonight in relative comfort or at the bottom of the Caribbean Sea. The telescope, if the ship possesses one, becomes the most important tool aboard. These instruments were precious beyond their weight in gold, providing the crucial advantage of information at distance. Through its lens, experienced eyes could distinguish between the rig of a merchant vessel and the lines of a warship, could count gun ports and estimate crew size, could determine whether the approaching vessel was hunter or hunted. But telescopes were rare and expensive, easily damaged by salt spray and rough handling. More often, identification depended on naked eyes that had learned to read the subtle differences in how different types of vessels move through water. A merchant ship, heavily loaded with cargo, sat deeper in the water and moved differently than a naval vessel designed for speed and maneuverability. The process of approach required patience that fought against every instinct screaming for action. Moving too quickly toward a potential target could alert them to danger, giving them time to escape or prepare for battle. Moving too slowly might allow the opportunity to slip away or might give the other vessels time to identify your ship as a threat and call for help. Your role in this deadly dance depends on your skills and experience. Perhaps you're one of the men assigned to prepare the guns, not the massive cannons of naval vessels. Smaller pieces, but smaller pieces that were more suited to the pirates' preferred tactics of intimidation and boarding. These guns were often a mixed collection acquired through various means, each with its own personality and requirements. Loading a cannon in the 18th century was a complex choreography of coordinated movements. First, the barrel had to be cleaned of residue from previous firing, using a long-handled swab that required careful technique to avoid leaving flammable material inside. Then came the powder charge, measured not with scientific precision, but by experience and instinct. Too little and the shot wouldn't have enough force to penetrate the target. Too much and the gun might explode, killing everyone nearby. The cannonball itself might be solid iron for maximum penetration, or it might be chain shot, designed to tear through rigging and disable the target's ability to maneuver. Some pirates used improvised projectiles, bags of scrap metal, broken glass, or even stones that turned the cannon into a massive shotgun designed to clear an enemy deck of defenders. The human cost of naval warfare in this period was staggering by modern standards. A single cannonball could kill or maim multiple men, and the medical care available could do little for the catastrophic injuries that resulted from direct hits. Pirates learned to prefer tactics that minimized their own casualties while maximizing psychological impact on their targets. The approach to potential prey involved careful consideration of wind direction, sea conditions, and the target's likely response. Pirates preferred to attack from upwind when possible, giving them the advantage of maneuverability and speed. They also favored dawn or dusk attacks when the low angle of sunlight made accurate identification and aimed fire more difficult for their targets. As your ship closes the distance, every man aboard feels the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that comes with imminent action. Some crews developed rituals or superstitions intended to ensure success and survival. Lucky coins, particular prayers, or specific arrangements of weapons and equipment. These practices served important psychological functions, providing some sense of control in situations where individual survival often came down to pure chance. The target vessel's response reveals crucial information about what you're facing. A merchant ship might attempt to flee, setting all possible sail and hoping to reach the protection of friendly waters or naval patrols. A well-armed merchantman might choose to fight, calculating that resistance offered better odds than surrender. A naval vessel would almost certainly engage, viewing pirates as enemies to be destroyed, rather than criminals to be captured. If the target chooses to run, the chase begins, a test of seamanship, ship design, and crew coordination that could last for hours or even days. Your vessel's speed depends not just on wind and sail area, but on how cleanly her hull moves through water, how efficiently her crew can trim sails for maximum advantage, and how much risk the captain is willing to take with masts and rigging pushed to their limits. During these chases, the crew works with desperate efficiency. Every line must be perfectly adjusted, every sail set to catch the maximum amount of wind without overstressing the masts that hold them. Men scramble up rigging that sways wildly as the ship pounds through waves, their lives depending on handholds that might give way without warning and muscles that must not fail despite exhaustion and fear. The target's behavior provides clues about what cargo she might carry and how desperately her crew wants to avoid capture. A ship carrying ordinary trade goods might surrender quickly once it becomes clear that escape is impossible. But a vessel carrying particularly valuable cargo, silver from New World mines, exotic goods from the Orient, or passengers willing to pay substantial ransoms, might fight desperately even against overwhelming odds. Pirates developed sophisticated intelligence networks that helped them identify the most profitable targets. Port workers, corrupt officials, disgruntled sailors, and local merchants all provided information about ships, cargoes, schedules, and routes. This intelligence was often more valuable than any single prize, as it allowed pirates to position themselves for maximum advantage while avoiding heavily defended convoys or naval patrols. The moment of actual engagement brought chaos that no amount of preparation could entirely control. Black powder weapons of the period were notoriously unreliable, with misfire rates that could exceed 20% under ideal conditions. In the heat of battle, with spray soaking everything and hands shaking from adrenaline, many shots simply failed to fire at all. Even successful shots were far less accurate than modern minds might imagine. Smoothbore guns without rifling sent their projectiles in roughly the right direction, but wind, wave motion, and the inherent limitations of 18th century metallurgy meant that hits often came down to luck as much as skill. Pirates learned to get close, very close, before opening fire, accepting the increased danger in exchange for better chances of effective hits. Boarding actions were the pirates' preferred method of concluding engagements, as they maximized the chances of capturing valuable cargo intact while minimizing the risk of accidentally sinking a prize that might contain their fortune. But boarding a defended vessel meant crossing open water under fire, then climbing over rails while enemy crew members tried to kill you with whatever weapons came to hand. The weapons used in these close-quarters fights were chosen for effectiveness in confined spaces rather than elegance or sporting fairness. Cutlasses were popular because their broad, curved blades were effective for both cutting and thrusting, while being less likely to get stuck in opponents or rigging. Pistols were often carried in multiples, since reloading during battle was nearly impossible. Many pirates carried 4 or 6 single-shot weapons, rather than trying to reload one gun multiple times. Improvised weapons were common and often devastatingly effective. Marlin spikes, the pointed tools used for working with rope, could punch through clothing and flesh with deadly efficiency. Boarding axes served double duty for chopping through obstacles and opponents. Even ordinary carpentry tools became weapons of war when wielded by desperate men fighting for their lives. If you're finding this journey into the harsh realities of pirate life engaging, I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening to this? And what time is it where you are? Drop a comment below. There's something wonderfully connecting about sharing these historical moments across time zones and continents. The aftermath of successful engagement brought its own challenges and opportunities. Wounded men on both sides needed immediate attention, though the quality of medical care available was primitive by any modern standard. Prize crews had to be assembled from your own ship's company, reducing your defensive capability while attempting to sail an unfamiliar vessel that might have been damaged in the fighting. Cargo evaluation required expertise that not all pirates possessed. Chests that appeared to contain treasure might hold only brass fittings or other items of little value. Exotic goods from distant lands might be incredibly valuable in the right markets, but worthless if you couldn't reach those markets safely. Perishable cargo created time pressure that forced quick decisions about destinations and routes. The treatment of captured crews varied widely, depending on the pirates' immediate needs, their long-term plans, and the behavior of the captured men. Sailors with useful skills, navigators, carpenters, surgeons, might be pressed into service with the pirate crew, sometimes willingly and sometimes under threat. Passengers with wealthy families might be held for ransom, though this created the problem of maintaining prisoners while conducting further operations. Ships taken as prizes faced several possible fates. The most valuable might be kept as additional vessels for the pirate fleet, though this required finding enough trustworthy crew members to sail them effectively. Lesser vessels might be stripped of everything useful and then burned or sunk to eliminate evidence. Sometimes captured ships were released after being emptied of cargo, their crews left with just enough supplies to reach the nearest port and spread word of the pirates' mercy, or ruthlessness. The division of spoils followed elaborate protocols that balanced individual contribution against collective effort, leadership prerogatives against democratic principles, and immediate needs against long-term planning. These calculations could make or break a pirate crew, as perceived unfairness in distribution could lead to mutiny, desertion, or worse. Each successful engagement brought not just material rewards, but also increased notoriety that was both asset and liability. A fearsome reputation could cause future targets to surrender without resistance, saving lives and effort on both sides. But that same reputation attracted the attention of naval forces and colonial governments who offered substantial rewards for the capture or elimination of successful pirates. The constant tension between success and survival defined every aspect of pirate life. Each prize taken increased wealth, but also increased risk. Each day at sea offered opportunities, but also brought the possibility of discovery by enemies who had every advantage of resources, legitimacy, and official support. These calculations never ended, creating a psychological pressure that affected every decision and colored every relationship. The evening watch finds you contemplating the strange family you've acquired through circumstance and shared danger. Around you, men who started as strangers have become closer than blood relatives, bound together by secrets that could hang them all, and experiences that no landlubber could truly understand. Yet beneath this brotherhood lies the constant awareness that any one of these men might, for the right price or under the right pressure, become the instrument of everyone's destruction. The relationships formed aboard a pirate vessel were unlike anything found in conventional society. Traditional hierarchies of birth, education, or social position meant nothing when survival depended on practical skills and proven courage. A former slave might find himself serving as quartermaster, responsible for discipline and the fair distribution of resources. A gentleman who had lost his fortune might find himself taking orders from a man who couldn't read, but possessed an intuitive understanding of weather and navigation that kept everyone alive. This mixing of social classes created unique dynamics that both liberated and constrained the men involved. Old prejudices and assumptions were constantly challenged by daily realities that refused to conform to land-based social norms. A man's worth was measured by his contribution to the ship's success and survival, not by his family name or previous occupation. The democratic traditions that developed aboard many pirate ships were born from practical necessity rather than political philosophy. Decisions that could affect everyone's survival, where to sail, what targets to pursue, how to divide resources, required input from men who would bear the consequences. This wasn't idealistic democracy, but the hard-edged pragmatism of people who understood that poor decisions meant death for everyone. Your own position in this floating society depends on skills you've developed and respect you've earned through actions rather than words. Perhaps you've proven yourself skilled at reading weather signs, able to sense approaching storms hours before they become visible. Maybe your steady hands make you valuable for delicate work on rigging or weapons maintenance. Or your previous life gave you literacy and mathematical skills that make you invaluable for navigation and record keeping. The quarters you share with these men offer no privacy, no personal space, no opportunity to hide weaknesses or maintain facades. Every man's character is revealed through countless small moments: how he behaves when exhausted, whether he shares scarce resources fairly, if he can be trusted to maintain watch while others sleep. These revelations create intimacy that can be both comforting and dangerous. Friendships formed in these conditions carry intensity unknown in more comfortable circumstances. A man who saves your life during a storm becomes more than a friend. He becomes part of your survival strategy, someone whose welfare directly affects your own chances of seeing another sunrise. These bonds could transcend all other loyalties, creating partnerships that lasted beyond individual ships or expeditions. Yet the same conditions that forged powerful friendships also created opportunities for deadly betrayals. Information about the ship's location, crew size, armament, and planned movements was incredibly valuable to naval forces and colonial governments. A man who found himself facing capture or execution might calculate that betraying his former companions offered his only chance of survival. The temptation to betray was constant and multifaceted. Colonial governors offered substantial rewards for information leading to the capture of pirate vessels and crews. Former victims of pirate attacks sometimes posted their own bounties. Naval officers advancing their careers knew that successful anti-piracy operations could lead to promotion and prize money. All of these incentives created a market for treachery that every pirate had to consider. Some betrayals were born of desperation rather than greed. A man facing execution might be offered clemency in exchange for information about his former associates. A pirate captured alive might find himself tortured for intelligence that could save his life at the cost of others. The psychological pressure of such situations could break even strong men, turning loyal crew members into unwilling instruments of their friends' destruction. Other betrayals were more calculated, the result of long-term planning by men who joined pirate crews specifically to gather intelligence for authorities. These infiltrators were often former naval personnel or colonial agents who could blend convincingly with legitimate recruits. Their presence was suspected but difficult to prove, creating an atmosphere of paranoia that poisoned relationships and decision-making. The methods for detecting potential traitors were crude but sometimes effective. Experienced pirates developed intuitive skills for reading human behavior under stress, watching for subtle signs that might indicate divided loyalties or hidden agendas. A man who seemed overly interested in the ship's destination, who asked too many questions about crew members' backgrounds, or who displayed knowledge that didn't match his claimed experience, might find himself under increased scrutiny. Testing suspected informants sometimes involved elaborate deceptions designed to reveal their true intentions. False information about planned attacks or rendezvous points might be shared selectively, with different versions given to different individuals. If authorities appeared at locations mentioned only to specific crew members, the source of the leak became obvious. Such tests were dangerous games that could backfire spectacularly if legitimate crew members were falsely accused. The punishment for proven betrayal was swift and final. Pirates couldn't afford the luxury of lengthy trials or appeals when their lives depended on absolute trust among crew members. A man caught passing information to enemies might be executed immediately, or he might face the slower death of marooning, left on a deserted island with minimal supplies and no hope of rescue. Yet the line between betrayal and survival was often thin and situational. A crew member who deserted during a dangerous operation might be branded a coward and traitor, while the same man leaving to care for sick family might be viewed with sympathy. Context mattered enormously in a world where traditional moral categories were constantly challenged by circumstances that land dwellers never faced. The bonds between crew members were strengthened by shared rituals that served both practical and psychological purposes. Many ships developed their own traditions around successful raids, safe arrivals at friendly ports, or the recruitment of new members. These ceremonies created group identity and reinforced the mutual dependence that kept everyone alive. Storytelling played a crucial role in building and maintaining crew cohesion. During calm evenings or periods of tedious work, men would share tales of their previous adventures, their lives before turning to piracy, or elaborate fantasies about what they would do with their share of future prizes. These stories served multiple purposes. They passed time, provided entertainment, and allowed crew members to learn about each other's skills, motivations, and reliability. The stories that circulated were rarely simple truth or complete fiction, but rather carefully constructed narratives that revealed some aspects of a man's character while concealing others. A former naval officer might emphasize his seamanship skills while downplaying his connections to authorities who would gladly see him hang. A runaway slave might focus on his knowledge of Caribbean geography while minimizing details that could lead to his recapture and return to plantation owners. Music and songs provided another form of bonding that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers. Many pirates could play simple instruments, fiddles, flutes, drums made from whatever materials were available. The songs they sang mixed traditional melodies from various cultures with new lyrics that reflected their unique experiences and challenges. These musical traditions served practical purposes beyond entertainment. Work songs helped coordinate group efforts like hauling on ropes or operating pumps. Warning songs could communicate danger without alerting potential enemies. Victory songs celebrated successful raids while reinforcing group identity and morale. The sharing of personal possessions took on special significance in an environment where privacy was impossible and individual ownership was often temporary. A man might loan his only spare shirt to a crew member whose clothing had been destroyed in battle, knowing that his own survival might someday depend on similar generosity. These exchanges created networks of mutual obligation that supplemented formal agreements about profit sharing and compensation. Food sharing followed elaborate protocols that balanced individual needs against group survival. During times of scarcity, meals might be distributed according to work performed, health status, or simply the democratic principle of equal shares for all. The man responsible for food distribution held a position of enormous trust, as any perception of favoritism or unfairness could destroy crew morale and threaten everyone's safety. Personal hygiene, difficult enough under the best circumstances, became a community concern when men lived in such close quarters. A crew member who neglected basic cleanliness didn't just suffer personally, his condition affected everyone around him, potentially spreading disease or attracting insects that made life miserable for all. Peer pressure and practical necessity enforced standards that might seem primitive by modern measures but were essential for group survival. The treatment of illness and injury revealed both the best and worst aspects of pirate brotherhood. Men who had been hardened by years of violence and danger could display remarkable tenderness when caring for wounded or sick companions. Limited medical supplies were shared without regard for personal cost, and dangerous duties might be redistributed to protect crew members who were not at full strength. Yet the same practical considerations that encouraged mutual care also created situations where individual welfare had to be sacrificed for group survival. A man whose injuries prevented him from contributing to the ship's operation might find himself left at the next port, regardless of his previous service or the bonds of friendship he had formed. These decisions were made with genuine regret, but they were made nonetheless when survival was at stake. The question of what to do with crew members who could no longer contribute their share created ongoing tensions that every ship had to resolve. Some vessels developed informal pension systems, setting aside portions of successful raids to support former crew members who had been disabled in service. Others relied on the charity of active pirates to care for their retired companions. Many simply abandoned men who could no longer pull their weight, a harsh reality that everyone understood, but few discussed openly. Romantic relationships presented particular challenges in an environment that was overwhelmingly male and where emotional attachments could complicate the practical decisions necessary for survival. Homosexual relationships, while not uncommon, had to be conducted with discretion to avoid conflicts that could tear the crew apart. The occasional woman who joined a pirate crew, whether disguised as a man or openly acknowledged, found herself navigating complex social dynamics that had no clear precedents. The democratic principles that governed many pirate ships extended to matters of personal conduct and relationship disputes. Crew members might vote on whether a particular relationship was disruptive to ship's discipline, whether disputes between lovers threatened group safety, or how to handle situations where personal loyalties conflicted with operational necessities. As you lie in your hammock tonight, listening to the familiar sounds of your floating home, the creak of wood under stress, the whisper of wind through rigging, the gentle splash of waves against the hull, you're surrounded by men whose lives have become intertwined with your own in ways that landlubbers could never understand. Some of these men you trust with your life, others you watch carefully, and a few you know would sell you to the hangman for the right price. This knowledge doesn't necessarily make you bitter. It simply makes you careful, alert, and grateful for those genuine friendships that shine like rare gems in the harsh reality of your chosen life. Take a moment here to reflect on the complexity of human relationships when survival is constantly at stake. I'd love to know what you think about these bonds forged in desperation and maintained through mutual need. Are you still comfortable in your bed, still following along on this journey through a world where comfort was rare and safety was never guaranteed. The pre-dawn darkness holds a different quality when you're aware that each sunrise might be your last. You've awakened not to an alarm clock, but to the subtle change in the ship's motion that suggests land nearby, or perhaps another vessel. Either possibility could mean opportunity, danger, or both. And the distinction often becomes clear only when it's too late to change course. Your body has learned to interpret dozens of signals that would be meaningless to landlubbers, but carry vital information for those who live by the sea's mercy. The change in wave patterns that indicates shallow water and hidden reefs. The shift in wind direction that might herald a storm or suggest the presence of land masses that alter air currents. The particular quality of stillness that sometimes precedes violent weather, when even the seabirds seem to sense approaching danger and alter their behavior accordingly. Death at sea could come in countless forms, many of them lingering and painful, rather than the quick, clean endings that popular stories preferred. Disease was perhaps the most common killer, spreading through crews who lived in conditions that would appall modern health inspectors. Scurvy weakened men gradually, robbing them of strength and vitality until they became too feeble to perform the work that kept everyone alive. Dysentery could kill through dehydration and exhaustion, while fever brought delirium and death to men who had survived battles and storms, but couldn't fight an invisible enemy in their blood. Accidents claimed their share of victims with cruel randomness. A man could survive dozens of boarding actions only to be killed by a falling block from damaged rigging. Someone might navigate through Caribbean storms for years only to slip on a wet deck during calm weather and strike his head fatally on an iron fitting. The sea itself was always ready to claim those who made even momentary mistakes. A rope burn that became infected, a moment's inattention while working aloft, a decision to dive overboard for a swim in waters where sharks had been sighted. The tropical diseases that flourished in the Caribbean added another layer of constant threat. Yellow fever struck quickly and often fatally, earning names like Yellow Jack that reflected both its symptoms and its deadly efficiency. Malaria could incapacitate entire crews when ships sheltered in swampy areas where mosquitoes bred. Tropical parasites, encountered through contaminated water or food, could weaken men slowly, making them vulnerable to other threats that healthy pirates might easily survive. Battle injuries that would be survivable with modern medical care often proved fatal in an era when the best available treatment might be a shot of rum and a piece of leather to bite while a carpenter's saw removed a shattered limb. Infection claimed many men who had survived the initial trauma, their wounds festering in the tropical heat and humidity despite whatever primitive care could be provided. The ship's medicine chest, when one existed, contained remedies that were more hope than science. Mercury compounds were used to treat various ailments, often causing additional poisoning. Opium provided pain relief, but was too valuable and scarce to use freely. Most treatment relied on folk remedies passed down through generations of sailors. Poultices made from whatever plants could be found, rituals and prayers that provided psychological comfort even when they couldn't heal physical ailments. The ship's surgeon, if one was aboard, was often a man who had learned his skills through apprenticeship to other ship's surgeons, rather than formal medical training. His tools were crude by any standard, saws and knives that served multiple purposes, needles stitching wounds closed, and various implements for extracting bullets or other foreign objects from injured men. Anesthesia was limited to alcohol and perhaps opium when available, making major procedures ordeals that required physical restraint of patients. Yet these rough practitioners often achieved remarkable results through experience and intuition. They learned to recognize the signs of infection, to set broken bones so they healed properly, and to treat the various ailments that plagued men living in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Their success rate might have been low by modern standards, but they were often the difference between life and death for injured pirates. The process of dying aboard a pirate ship was rarely private or dignified. In the cramped quarters where men lived pressed together, illness and death became community experiences that affected everyone's morale and practical situation. A man dying slowly of fever or disease might suffer for days or weeks, while his companions tried to care for him without compromising their own health or the ship's operation. The disposal of bodies presented both practical and emotional challenges. Burial at sea was the only option when far from land, but it required ceremonies that honored the dead while acknowledging the harsh realities of pirate life. Bodies had to be weighted to ensure they sank rather than floating, and potentially revealing the ship's location to searchers. Personal effects had to be distributed among survivors, often according to agreements made before death, but sometimes leading to disputes that could divide the crew. The psychological toll of constant exposure to death and violence affected every man differently. Some developed a fatalistic attitude that bordered on recklessness, throwing themselves into dangerous situations with apparent disregard for consequences. Others became increasingly cautious, seeing threats in every situation and trusting no one completely. Many fell somewhere between these extremes, learning to function effectively while carrying emotional scars that never fully healed. Superstitions flourished in an environment where death was commonplace and its causes often mysterious. Certain behaviors, objects, or words became associated with good or bad luck, and violating these taboos could create serious tensions among crew members already stressed by danger and uncertainty. A man who whistled during calm weather might be blamed for summoning storms, while someone who mentioned certain topics might be accused of inviting disaster. The presence of death also shaped the pirates' approach to pleasure and celebration. Knowing that any day might be their last, many crews developed traditions of intense celebration following successful raids or narrow escapes from danger. These festivities served important psychological functions, releasing tension and reaffirming life in the face of constant mortality, but they could also lead to excesses that compromised the ship's readiness for future challenges. Religious beliefs among pirates ran the full spectrum, from devout faith to complete atheism, often changing in response to circumstances. Men who had rejected organized religion might find themselves praying desperately during storms or battles, while others maintained their faith despite, or perhaps because of, the violence and illegality of their chosen life. Some ships carried clergy, either willingly recruited or pressed into service, who provided spiritual comfort alongside whatever practical skills they possessed. The question of what happened after death took on particular urgency for men who lived outside society's laws and moral codes. Traditional religious teachings suggested that pirates faced eternal damnation for their crimes, but many developed alternative spiritual frameworks that allowed for redemption, or at least divine understanding of their circumstances. These beliefs were often highly personal and rarely discussed openly, but they provided psychological comfort that helped men face daily dangers. The timing of death could affect a pirate's legacy and his companion's survival in ways that landlubbers never considered. A man who died after a successful raid might leave his share to be distributed among survivors, temporarily improving everyone's situation. Someone who died during preparations for an attack might be seen as a bad omen that affected crew morale and decision-making. A death during battle could inspire desperate courage in survivors, or could break their will to continue fighting. The leadership challenges created by sudden deaths tested every crew's resilience and organizational skills. When a captain died in battle, the crew had to immediately choose a replacement while continuing to fight for their lives. When key specialists, navigators, gunners, surgeons were killed, their knowledge died with them, potentially leaving everyone else dangerously vulnerable. Some crews developed elaborate succession plans and cross-training programs designed to minimize the impact of losing key personnel. Others relied on democratic processes that could choose replacement leaders quickly when circumstances demanded. A few ships were destroyed by power struggles that erupted when death created leadership vacuums at critical moments. The awareness of mortality also influenced how pirates approached relationships with family and friends they had left behind on land. Letters home, when they could be safely sent, often carried the weight of possible final communications. Money sent to support families might be the last assistance those relatives would receive. Some pirates made elaborate arrangements for the distribution of their possessions after death, while others lived so completely in the present that they made no provisions for the future. The children of pirates faced particular challenges, often growing up without knowing their fathers or understanding the source of whatever financial support they received. Some pirate fathers made efforts to provide legitimate futures for their children, using their illegal gains to purchase education or business opportunities that might lift the next generation out of poverty and criminality. Others remained completely cut off from their offspring, either by choice or by the practical impossibility of maintaining contact while living as outlaws. The irony of pirates who spent their lives taking property from others while trying to provide for their own families was not lost on many of them. Some found ways to rationalize this contradiction, arguing that they were stealing from wealthy merchants and corrupt officials rather than from common people. Others simply accepted the moral complexity of their situation without attempting to resolve its contradictions. As you listen to the familiar night sounds of your floating home, you're conscious that some of your companions might not hear these sounds again after tomorrow's sunrise. This knowledge doesn't necessarily make you morbid or pessimistic. Many pirates developed a heightened appreciation for life's simple pleasures, precisely because they understood how fragile and temporary those pleasures could be. The taste of fresh water after weeks of drinking from fouled casks, the feel of solid ground underfoot during brief shore visits, the satisfaction of work well done in the face of challenging conditions. All of these experiences gained intensity from the awareness that they might not be repeated. The morning brings calculations that would challenge any merchant or banker, but with stakes measured in survival rather than mere profit. You're part of an economic system that operates entirely outside legal frameworks, where success depends on violence and cunning rather than contracts and credit, and where the difference between wealth and poverty can change with a single lucky prize or disastrous encounter. The wealth that pirates accumulated came from a complex web of sources that extended far beyond the simple robbery that popular imagination suggests. Prize ships provided the most obvious source of income, but evaluating and liquidating these captures required skills and knowledge that many pirates lacked. A chest that appeared to contain gold might hold brass fittings or costume jewelry. Exotic trade goods might be incredibly valuable in specific markets, but worthless if you couldn't reach those markets safely. Cargo evaluation became a crucial skill that could determine whether a risky attack was worth attempting. Experienced pirates learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated valuable freight, the way a ship sat in the water when heavily loaded, the types of escort vessels that accompanied particularly precious cargoes, the routes and timing that suggested connection to lucrative trade cycles. The Spanish treasure fleets that carried silver from New World mines to European markets represented the ultimate prizes, but they were also the most heavily defended and carefully tracked convoys in the Caribbean. Attacking such a fleet required careful planning, substantial resources, and willingness to accept enormous risks for potentially enormous rewards. Most pirates contented themselves with smaller, less dangerous targets that offered reasonable prospects of success. Individual merchant vessels could carry surprising wealth in forms that weren't immediately obvious. Passengers might possess jewelry, gold coins, or letters of credit that could be converted to cash in friendly ports. Ship's officers often carried substantial personal funds, while crew members might have wages or trade goods acquired in previous voyages. Even captured ships themselves had value. Their hulls, rigging, weapons, and equipment could be sold or used to improve the pirates' own vessels. The process of converting stolen goods into usable wealth presented challenges that legitimate merchants never faced. Pirates couldn't simply sail into established ports and sell their captures openly. They needed networks of corrupt officials, black market dealers, and cooperative merchants who were willing to ask no questions about the source of goods offered for sale. These criminal networks operated throughout the Caribbean, often with the tacit or open cooperation of colonial officials who were poorly paid by their home governments and eager to supplement their incomes through illegal means. A governor who purchased stolen goods through intermediaries might officially condemn piracy while privately profiting from it. Port officials who accepted bribes to ignore suspicious cargoes became essential partners in the pirates' economic ecosystem. The costs of pirate operations were substantial and often underestimated by those who saw only the potential profits. Ships required constant maintenance, repair, and provisioning that consumed large portions of any wealth acquired through piracy. Weapons and ammunition had to be purchased or captured from hostile forces. Food, water, and other supplies needed regular replenishment, often at inflated prices charged by merchants who knew their customers had few alternatives. Crew costs could consume half or more of a successful raid's profits, as pirates expected compensation that reflected the risks they undertook and the skills they provided. A typical pirate crew might include 30 to 60 men, each expecting his share of any prizes taken, plus compensation for injuries received in service. These costs continued even during unsuccessful periods when no prizes were taken, but the crew still needed food, water, and other necessities. The democratic traditions that governed many pirate ships extended to financial matters, with elaborate systems for dividing spoils according to contribution, risk, and position. These agreements, often written and signed by crew members, specified shares for different categories of personnel. Officers received larger portions than ordinary seamen. Specialists like navigators or surgeons might receive bonuses, and compensation was provided for specific types of wounds or disabilities. These financial arrangements were more sophisticated than many legitimate businesses of the period. Pirates developed systems for handling multiple currencies, for evaluating goods whose value depended on location and timing, and for maintaining accurate records of transactions and distributions. Some pirate accountants kept detailed ledgers that would have impressed professional merchants, tracking individual crew members' earnings, debts, and credits with meticulous accuracy. The question of what to do with accumulated wealth created ongoing challenges for pirates who had no access to legitimate banking or investment systems. Burying treasure on remote islands became popular not because of romantic tradition, but because of practical necessity. Pirates needed secure storage for wealth they couldn't openly deposit or invest. These hidden caches were often the only form of savings available to men who lived outside legal society. However, buried treasure created its own problems. Maps had to be drawn and hidden, locations had to be memorized by people whose lives were constantly at risk, and the physical security of remote hiding places was always uncertain. Many pirates lost their accumulated wealth when they were killed before they could recover their hidden treasures, or when they forgot or misremembered locations after years of additional adventures. Some pirates attempted to legitimize their wealth by purchasing land, businesses, or other assets that could provide income and respectability. These investments required careful planning and often elaborate deceptions about the source of funds used for purchases. A successful pirate might acquire plantations, merchant ships, or trading companies, sometimes using intermediaries to disguise his connection to illegal activities. The transformation from pirate to respectable businessman was difficult but not impossible for those who accumulated sufficient wealth and avoided capture or execution. Colonial society was often willing to overlook questionable pasts when substantial assets were involved, particularly in frontier areas where capital was scarce and questions about its source were considered impolite. Insurance and risk management, standard features of legitimate commerce, took unique forms in the pirate economy. Some crews developed informal insurance systems where members contributed to common funds that would support wounded or disabled pirates and their families. These arrangements provided social safety nets that were often superior to what was available to legitimate sailors or workers in other industries. The financing of pirate expeditions sometimes involved complex partnerships between pirates and legitimate investors who provided capital in exchange for shares of expected profits. These arrangements allowed wealthy merchants to profit from piracy while maintaining plausible deniability about their involvement. Such investments were risky but potentially very profitable, leading to the development of sophisticated financial instruments that resembled modern venture capital arrangements. The pirate economy also included extensive trade in information, services, and specialized goods that weren't available through legitimate channels. Knowledge about ship movements, port defenses, treasure locations, and naval patrol patterns commanded high prices among those who could use such intelligence effectively. Skills like navigation, weapons maintenance, and medical treatment were valuable commodities that could be traded for money, favors, or protection. Currency exchange presented constant challenges in an era when numerous countries issued coins and paper money with varying degrees of reliability and acceptance. Pirates had to become experts in evaluating different currencies, understanding exchange rates, and identifying counterfeit money that could leave them with worthless paper or debased metal instead of genuine wealth. The international nature of Caribbean piracy meant that successful pirates dealt with Spanish silver, French gold, English pounds, Dutch guilders, and various colonial currencies whose values fluctuated based on political and economic conditions that were often difficult to predict or understand. A chest of coins that seemed valuable when captured might lose much of its worth by the time it could be converted to usable currency. Some pirates became essentially international merchants, using their ships and crews to engage in both legal and illegal trade, depending on opportunities and circumstances. These operations required sophisticated understanding of market conditions, political situations, and legal frameworks in multiple jurisdictions. The most successful pirate merchants developed reputations for reliability and fair dealing that allowed them to operate in legitimate markets despite their criminal activities. The seasonal nature of much Caribbean commerce created opportunities and challenges that shaped pirate operations throughout the year. Harvest seasons in agricultural regions determined when ships would be carrying valuable cargoes of sugar, tobacco, or other products. Weather patterns affected shipping schedules and route choices, creating predictable concentrations of merchant vessels at certain times and places. Spanish treasure fleets followed annual schedules that were well known to pirates, colonial officials, and European governments. These regular patterns allowed pirates to position themselves advantageously, but they also enabled authorities to concentrate defensive efforts at the most vulnerable points and times. The boom and bust cycles that characterized the pirate economy created psychological pressures that affected decision-making and crew relationships. A crew that had recently taken valuable prizes might become overconfident and careless, while pirates who had experienced long periods without success might become desperate and willing to take excessive risks for marginal rewards. Managing success presented its own challenges, as wealthy pirates became targets for other criminal groups, corrupt officials who demanded larger bribes, and authorities who saw them as high-value prizes worthy of special attention. Some successful pirates found that their wealth made them less rather than more secure, as everyone around them sought ways to profit from their success. The question of retirement planning occupied the thoughts of many pirates who survived long enough to accumulate substantial wealth. Unlike legitimate professions that offered pensions or other forms of security in old age, piracy provided no guarantees beyond what individuals could create for themselves. Some pirates invested in legitimate businesses, others relied on hidden treasure caches, and many simply hoped to die before their accumulated wealth was exhausted. As you consider the complex financial realities of pirate life, remember that behind every romantic tale of buried treasure and stolen gold lie the practical concerns of people trying to build security and prosperity under conditions that made both extremely difficult to achieve. Take a moment to like this video if you're finding these insights into historical economics interesting, and let me know in the comments what surprises you most about the business side of piracy. The afternoon sun beats down mercilessly as you contemplate the paradox that defines your existence. You've gained freedom from society's constraints, only to discover that liberty itself comes with costs that few landlubbers could imagine or endure. The freedom to sail where you choose is balanced by the constant need to avoid naval patrols and hostile ports. The freedom to take what you need is tempered by the necessity of fighting for every acquisition. The freedom from conventional morality is complicated by the need to maintain trust and cooperation among men whose lives depend on each other. This freedom was often born from desperation rather than choice. Many pirates began their careers not as romantic rebels against authority, but as men whose legitimate options had been exhausted by circumstances beyond their control. Economic hardship, political persecution, social discrimination, or simple bad luck drove them to the sea as the only remaining alternative to starvation, imprisonment, or worse fates on land. The process of becoming a pirate involved burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. Once a man was identified as a pirate by authorities, he faced execution if captured, regardless of his subsequent behavior or attempts at reformation. This reality created a psychological prison that was invisible but absolute. Pirates were free to go anywhere they could sail, but they could never truly go home again. Your daily existence aboard the ship reflects freedoms that were revolutionary for the 18th century, when rigid social hierarchies determined most people's lives from birth to death. Here, a man's worth depends on his contributions rather than his ancestry. Democratic decisions replace arbitrary authority. Wealth is distributed according to agreed-upon principles rather than inherited privilege. Yet these freedoms exist within constraints that are far harsher than anything imposed by conventional society. The freedom to choose your companions is limited by practical necessities that force cooperation with men you might avoid in other circumstances. Personal disputes that could be resolved through legal systems on land become matters of life and death when you're trapped together on a ship hundreds of miles from the nearest court. The man whose personality grates on your nerves might be the same person whose skills keep everyone alive during storms or battles. Romantic freedom, such as it existed, was complicated by the demographics and dangers of pirate life. The absence of women on most ships created emotional and physical tensions that had to be managed carefully to prevent conflicts that could tear crews apart. Shore leave provided opportunities for romantic encounters, but these were necessarily brief and often with people whose discretion was uncertain and whose loyalties were questionable. The freedom to accumulate wealth was real, but came with the understanding that possession was temporary and security was illusory. A successful raid might make you temporarily wealthy, but that wealth could be lost in the next engagement, confiscated by authorities, stolen by companions, or simply consumed by the ongoing costs of maintaining your outlaw existence. Pirates learned to enjoy their prosperity while they had it, knowing that permanence was impossible in their chosen life. Freedom from conventional morality allowed pirates to ignore social restrictions that limited other people's behavior, but it also removed the psychological comfort that came from knowing right from wrong according to established standards. Pirates had to develop their own ethical systems, often through trial and error, creating moral codes that balanced individual needs against group survival, immediate desires against long-term consequences, and personal loyalty against practical necessity. The absence of external authority created both opportunities and obligations that most people never experienced. Pirates were free to make collective decisions about their destinations, activities, and internal organization, but they were also responsible for the consequences of those decisions in ways that citizens of organized societies rarely faced. Bad choices meant direct personal suffering rather than abstract political or economic problems. This responsibility extended to matters of justice and punishment that were handled by established legal systems in conventional society. Pirates had to develop their own methods for resolving disputes, punishing misconduct, and maintaining discipline without the infrastructure of courts, jails, or professional law enforcement. These improvised justice systems were often harsh by modern standards, but they were also sometimes more fair and democratic than the legal systems available to common people in the 18th century. The freedom to travel anywhere the wind could take you was intoxicating for men who came from societies where most people never ventured more than a few miles from their birthplaces. Pirates saw islands, coastlines, and cultures that were unknown to all but a handful of explorers and traders. They witnessed sunsets from perspectives that no landlubber could imagine and experienced the ocean's moods in all their variety and intensity. Yet, this geographic freedom came with isolation that could be psychologically devastating. Pirates were cut off from families, friends and communities that had shaped their identities and provided emotional support. The bonds formed with fellow pirates were intense but fragile, subject to the pressures of danger, competition, and betrayal that could destroy relationships without warning. The freedom from taxation, military service, and other civic obligations that burdened conventional citizens was offset by responsibilities that were often more demanding and dangerous. Instead of paying taxes to support armies, pirates had to fight their own battles. Instead of relying on government services, they had to provide their own security, medical care, and dispute resolution. Instead of following established laws, they had to negotiate agreements and maintain social order through personal relationships and collective action. Cultural freedom allowed pirates to adopt customs, languages, and practices from the various societies they encountered during their travels. Pirate crews often became melting pots of different nationalities, religions, and traditions that mixed and evolved in ways that weren't possible in more rigid social structures. This cultural mixing created unique communities with their own languages, songs, customs, and values that reflected the diverse backgrounds of their members. The freedom to reinvent yourself was perhaps one of the most appealing aspects of pirate life for men whose past lives had been constrained by circumstances they couldn't control. A former slave could become a captain, a dispossessed nobleman could work alongside common sailors as equals, and a man with a criminal past could earn respect through courage and competence. These transformations were possible because pirate society judged people by their current actions rather than their historical circumstances. However, the constant need to prove yourself anew meant that reputation and respect had to be earned repeatedly through dangerous actions. Unlike conventional society, where status could be inherited or purchased, pirate society required continuous demonstration of worth through practical contributions to the group's survival and success. This system was more meritocratic than most alternatives available in the 18th century, but it was also more demanding and less forgiving of weakness or failure. The freedom to ignore conventional religious and moral teachings was both liberating and terrifying for men who had been raised in societies where these beliefs provided structure and meaning for daily life. Some pirates embraced this freedom enthusiastically, creating their own belief systems that justified their actions and provided psychological comfort. Others struggled with guilt and fear about the spiritual consequences of their choices, leading to complex relationships with religion that combined rejection of authority with desperate seeking for redemption. Economic freedom meant that pirates could potentially accumulate wealth much faster than was possible through legitimate work, but it also meant accepting risks that could result in total loss or death. The boom and bust cycle of pirate economics provided dramatic highs and lows that were emotionally exhausting and financially unstable. Pirates had to learn to manage their resources and expectations in ways that balanced optimism with realism, hope with caution. The freedom to live according to your own schedule was remarkable for people accustomed to lives regulated by employers, seasons, or social expectations. Pirates could sleep when they were tired, eat when food was available, and pursue activities that interested them rather than following rigid routines imposed by others. This flexibility was essential for survival in an environment where circumstances could change rapidly and unpredictably. Yet this temporal freedom was constrained by the rhythms of the sea, which imposed their own requirements that were often more demanding than conventional schedules. Storms didn't respect human preferences about when to work. Enemy ships appeared according to their own logic rather than convenient timing. The need for water, food, and supplies created deadlines that were more absolute than any imposed by human authority. Political freedom allowed pirates to ignore the conflicts and allegiances that divided conventional society. A pirate crew might include men who had been enemies in previous wars, united by their common circumstances and mutual dependence. This freedom from political loyalty was both practical and philosophical, allowing people to focus on immediate survival rather than abstract principles or distant authorities. However, this political independence also meant that pirates had no protection from any government and could expect help from none. They were truly on their own in a world where political connections often determined survival. This isolation forced pirates to develop self-reliance and mutual dependence that was more complete than anything experienced by citizens who could appeal to authorities for protection or assistance. The ultimate price of pirate freedom was the knowledge that it was temporary and conditional. Every day brought the possibility that capture, injury, or death would end the adventure permanently. This awareness gave a particular intensity to pirate life that could be both exhilarating and exhausting, creating people who lived more fully in the present because they understood how uncertain the future remained. As you lie in your hammock tonight, listening to the sounds of men who have chosen the same dangerous freedom that you've embraced, consider whether the price you've paid has been worth the liberty you've gained. For most pirates, this question had no simple answer. The freedom was real and precious, but its costs were higher than anyone could have imagined before experiencing them firsthand. I hope you're finding some peace in these reflections on freedom and its complexities. What does freedom mean to you as you listen to this in your comfortable, safe environment? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if these historical journeys resonate with you. The sky this morning carries the subtle signs that experienced sailors learn to read like a language written in clouds and wind patterns. Signs that suggest the weather ahead will test every skill you've developed and every bond you've formed with your companions. But the storms that threaten pirate ships come in many forms, and the ones that blow across the Caribbean waters are often less dangerous than the tempests of human emotion, political change, and social upheaval that can destroy crews and vessels even under clear skies. The physical storms of the tropical Atlantic follow patterns that become familiar to those who survive long enough to recognize them. The hurricane season, roughly from June through November, brings weather systems that can grow from minor disturbances to ship-killing monsters in a matter of hours. The barometric pressure changes that precede these storms create headaches and joint pain in men whose bodies have become sensitive to atmospheric variations through years of exposure to maritime conditions. You've learned to watch the behavior of seabirds, whose instinctive responses to changing pressure and wind patterns often provide earlier warnings than any instrument available to 18th century navigators. When frigate birds suddenly disappear from their usual feeding areas, when petrels change their flight patterns, or when dolphins begin behaving erratically, experienced sailors know to prepare for weather that could challenge their survival skills. The preparation for a major storm involves every person aboard working with desperate efficiency to secure everything that could become a projectile in heavy seas. Loose barrels, tools, weapons, and personal possessions all must be lashed down with rope and canvas, creating a web of restraints that transforms the ship into a tightly bound package designed to survive the ocean's fury. Even the smallest items, cups, knives, books, become dangerous missiles when winds reach hurricane force, and the ship pitches at angles that make decks into walls and walls into ceilings. The psychological preparation is often more challenging than the physical work. Men who have faced armed enemies with steady nerves sometimes find themselves terrified by the approach of weather systems that dwarf human conflicts in their power and indifference. The knowledge that your survival depends entirely on the integrity of wooden planks and hemp rope, with no possibility of escape or surrender, creates a particular type of anxiety that tests even the strongest personalities. As the storm approaches, the ship's motion changes from the familiar roll and pitch of normal sailing to the violent, unpredictable movements that make every step dangerous and every handhold crucial. You learn to move like a spider, always maintaining 3 points of contact with the ship's structure, never trusting your balance to remain stable for more than a few seconds at a time. The sound of a hurricane at sea is unlike anything experienced on land. It begins as a low moan in the rigging and builds to a howl that drowns out human voices, and finally becomes a roar so intense that communication requires direct contact, grabbing someone's arm and shouting directly into their ear while hoping the wind doesn't steal your words before they can be heard. The waves during a major storm grow beyond anything that landlubbers can truly comprehend. What begins as swells that lift and lower the ship in long, regular rhythms transforms into mountains of water that tower above the highest masts, their faces streaked with foam torn from their crests by winds that can strip bark from trees and skin from exposed human flesh. When these giants break over the ship, the experience is like being inside a collapsing building made of water. The weight of several tons of seawater crashes down on the deck with enough force to crush anything not securely fastened, while the follow-through sends torrents cascading through any opening it can find. Men caught on deck during these onslaughts must hold their breath and trust their grip, knowing that being swept overboard in such conditions means certain death. The pumps become the most important equipment aboard, worked by crews who understand that stopping means sinking. The ship's hull, stressed beyond its normal limits by the tremendous forces of wind and wave, opens seams that allow water to enter faster than seems possible. The rhythm of the pumps becomes a heartbeat that must never stop. Men work until they collapse from exhaustion, then are replaced by others who continue the vital work of keeping the ocean outside where it belongs. Sleep becomes impossible during the worst storms, not just because of the violent motion, but because everyone's survival depends on constant vigilance and ready response to emergencies. Men wedge themselves into whatever secure spaces they can find, dozing fitfully between crisis responses, always listening for the sounds that indicate new problems requiring immediate attention. The hunger and thirst that develop during extended storms add another layer of misery to an already desperate situation. Cooking becomes impossible when galley fires pose unacceptable risks and when no pot or pan can remain stable long enough to heat food properly. Water, already precious, must be rationed even more carefully when spills and contamination reduce the available supply. Yet these physical storms, terrifying as they are, often bring crews closer together through shared hardship and mutual dependence. Men who might have harbored grudges or suspicions find themselves working side by side, their personal differences temporarily forgotten in the face of dangers that threaten everyone equally. The class distinctions and social hierarchies that might operate during normal times disappear when survival requires every hand working together without regard for anything except competence and courage. The storms of politics and economics that swept through the Caribbean during the Golden Age of Piracy were often more destructive to pirate careers than any hurricane. The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 ended the War of Spanish Succession and eliminated many of the privateering commissions that had provided legal cover for attacking enemy shipping. Thousands of sailors who had been legitimate warriors one day found themselves classified as criminals the next, with no change in their behavior or activities. These political changes created waves of displaced seamen who had few options except piracy for supporting themselves and their families. The sudden peace that pleased European politicians created unemployment and desperation among maritime workers whose skills were no longer needed for legitimate warfare. Many of these men had spent years learning to fight at sea and had no other marketable abilities for peacetime economies. The changing policies of colonial governments created another type of storm that pirates had to navigate carefully. A governor who had previously tolerated or even encouraged piracy might suddenly find himself under pressure from his home government to crack down on illegal activities. Ports that had welcomed pirates with open arms could become deadly traps when political winds shifted in distant capitals. The economic storms that affected legitimate commerce also impacted pirate operations in complex ways. When merchant shipping declined due to war, disease, or economic depression, there were fewer targets available for pirate attacks. When trade routes shifted due to political changes or new discoveries, pirates had to adapt their operations or find themselves attacking empty waters where no prizes could be found. The social storms within pirate crews were often the most dangerous as they struck without warning and could destroy groups that had survived battles and natural disasters. Personal conflicts between crew members could escalate into violence that split crews and left survivors vulnerable to external threats. Disputes over leadership, treasure distribution, or strategic decisions could create factions that undermine the cooperation essential for survival. The psychological storms that affected individual pirates were perhaps the most difficult to weather, as they provided no external enemy to fight and no clear resolution through action. The isolation from family and legitimate society wore on men's spirits over time, creating depression and despair that could be more debilitating than physical injuries. The constant stress of living outside the law, always watching for threats and betrayal, took psychological tolls that accumulated over years. Some pirates developed drinking problems as they attempted to cope with stresses that had no other outlet. Alcohol was readily available and provided temporary relief from anxiety and depression, but it also impaired judgment and created additional problems that compounded existing difficulties. Ships' articles often included provisions for dealing with crew members whose drinking affected their performance or endangered others. Others found religion or developed spiritual practices that helped them cope with the moral complexities and practical dangers of their chosen life. These beliefs were often highly personal and syncretic, combining elements from various traditions encountered during their travels. Some pirates carried religious objects or performed rituals that provided psychological comfort, even when they couldn't reduce actual dangers. The storms of aging and infirmity struck pirates with particular cruelty, as their lifestyle provided no comfortable retirement options. Men whose strength and reflexes had been their primary assets found themselves increasingly unable to perform the physical work that kept crews alive and successful. The democratic traditions of many pirate ships meant that these declining members retained their voices in crew decisions, but their reduced contributions created tensions between loyalty and practical necessity. Injuries that might be manageable for people with access to proper medical care could become career-ending disasters for pirates. A broken leg that healed improperly, a head injury that affected balance or coordination, or an arm wound that reduced grip strength could make a man liability rather than an asset to his crew. These physical limitations were often irreversible given the primitive medical care available, forcing difficult decisions about individual survival versus group welfare. The cumulative effect of multiple storms, physical, political, economic, social, and personal, created a mortality rate among pirates that was staggering by any standard. Most men who chose piracy died within a few years, either from violence, disease, accident, or the accumulated effects of hardship and stress. The romantic image of successful pirates living lives of luxury and adventure was reality for only a tiny percentage of those who tried this career. Yet those who survived developed resilience and adaptability that few other professions could match. They learned to read situations quickly, to make decisions with incomplete information, to maintain hope in desperate circumstances, and to find ways to cooperate with difficult people when survival depended on teamwork. These skills served them well not just in their pirate careers, but in whatever legitimate occupations they might later pursue. The stories that survivors told about weathering various storms became part of pirate folklore, passed down through generations of sailors who faced similar challenges. These tales served both entertainment and educational purposes, teaching younger crew members about techniques for survival and providing psychological preparation for the hardships they would inevitably face. As you lie listening to the gentle sounds of a ship at anchor in calm waters, remember that this peace is temporary and precious. The storms will come, they always do, but they will also pass, leaving behind sailors who are stronger, wiser, and more grateful for the quiet moments when the sea allows rest and reflection. Take a moment to appreciate whatever calm you're experiencing in your own life right now. I'd love to know, have you ever weathered storms, literal or metaphorical, that changed how you view the world? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe if these historical journeys through challenging times resonate with your own experiences. Dawn breaks over waters that might hide friends or enemies, opportunities or traps, and your survival depends on skills that go far beyond simple seamanship or fighting ability. You've become a student of human nature, reading the subtle signs that indicate whether an approaching vessel poses a threat or offers potential profit. The art of staying alive in hostile waters requires constant attention to details that landlubbers would never notice. The way smoke rises from a distant cooking fire, the pattern of bird flights that might indicate human activity, the particular quality of silence that sometimes precedes violence. Your eyes have learned to distinguish between the countless variations of sails, rigging, and hull shapes that identify different types of vessels from distances that would make such recognition impossible for untrained observers. A merchant ship sits differently in the water than a warship of similar size. A pirate vessel often shows signs of hasty modifications and repairs that mark it as clearly as a painted sign to those who know what to look for. The process of approach and identification has become a deadly game of information gathering where mistakes can mean death for everyone aboard. Too aggressive an approach might trigger flight or fight responses that eliminate opportunities for peaceful resolution. Too cautious an approach might allow dangerous enemies to gain tactical advantages or valuable prizes to escape beyond reach. Your ship maintains an arsenal of flags from various nations, each carefully preserved and ready for use in the elaborate deceptions that allow pirates to operate to operators patrolled by hostile forces. Flying Spanish colors might allow approach to a Spanish merchant vessel, while French flags could provide cover when crossing paths with French naval patrols. But using the wrong flag at the wrong time could trigger immediate attack from vessels that might otherwise have been neutral or even friendly. The timing of flag changes requires split-second decisions based on rapidly changing circumstances. A flag that provides protection from one ship might mark you as an enemy to another vessel that appears over the horizon minutes later. The wrong flag displayed too long might convince potential prizes that you're not a threat, allowing them to escape, while changing flags too obviously might alert everyone in sight to your true intentions. Communication at sea follows protocols that have evolved over centuries, but remain deadly serious games where the wrong word or gesture can trigger catastrophic misunderstandings. Signal flags, lantern patterns, and cannon shots all carry meanings that must be understood perfectly by everyone involved. Pirates had to master these legitimate communication methods while also developing their own secret signals for coordinating attacks or warnings. The approach to potential prizes requires psychological skills that blend acting ability with strategic thinking. You must appear confident but not threatening, curious but not suspicious, friendly but not vulnerable. The captain who hails another vessel must sound natural while probing for information about cargo, destination, escort status, and defensive capability, all without revealing his own intentions or identity. Weather conditions add layers of complexity to every encounter, as wind direction determines who has the advantage of maneuverability, wave height affects the accuracy of gunfire, and visibility changes the balance between stealth and speed. A storm approaching on the horizon might provide cover for escape, but could also trap everyone in the same area when violence erupts. The decision to attack involves calculations that must be made quickly, with incomplete information and potentially catastrophic consequences for error. How many men does the target vessel carry? What weapons do they possess? How valuable is their cargo likely to be? Are there other ships nearby that might respond to distress signals? Can your crew handle the target without sustaining casualties that would weaken you for future encounters? The actual mechanics of ship-to-ship combat in the Age of Sail were far more complex and uncertain than popular entertainment suggests. Cannon accuracy was poor under the best circumstances and became nearly useless when ships were moving in heavy seas. Most battles were decided by boarding actions that required courage, skill, and often simple luck to survive. The process of boarding an enemy vessel meant crossing open water while under fire, then climbing over rails while defenders tried to kill you with whatever weapons they could bring to bear. Cutlasses were preferred for these close-quarters fights, not because they were particularly elegant weapons, but because their broad blades were less likely to get stuck in opponents or rigging, and their curved design worked well for both cutting and thrusting in confined spaces. Psychological warfare played crucial roles in pirate tactics, as reputation for ruthlessness could often achieve victory without actual fighting. A crew that knew they faced the notorious Blackbeard or Black Bart might surrender immediately rather than face certain death in hopeless resistance. Pirates cultivated fearsome reputations through carefully orchestrated displays of violence that discouraged future resistance while minimizing their own casualties. The treatment of prisoners after successful attacks required delicate balancing of practical needs, crew morale, and future reputation. Prisoners who were treated well might spread word that surrender to particular pirates was preferable to hopeless resistance. But prisoners who were treated too leniently might not take pirate threats seriously, leading to future problems. Prisoners who possessed valuable skills might be pressed into service, while those who seemed likely to cause trouble might be marooned or worse. The evaluation of captured cargo required expertise that many pirates lacked, leading to situations where valuable items were discarded as worthless, while apparently precious goods turned out to be nearly valueless. Experienced pirates learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated genuine quality: the weight and color of metals, the feel and appearance of quality textiles, the construction details that marked genuine luxury goods versus clever imitations. The process of transferring cargo from captured vessels to pirate ships was dangerous, time-consuming work that left both vessels vulnerable to attack by naval forces or other pirates. Heavy items like cannons or treasure chests had to be moved using ropes and pulleys, operated by men working in small boats that could be swamped by waves or capsized by shifting loads. Time pressure was constant during these operations, as every hour spent transferring cargo increased the risk of discovery by hostile forces. Pirates had to make quick decisions about what to take, what to leave behind, and whether to risk the time needed to secure particularly valuable items that were difficult to move. The disposal of captured vessels presented strategic decisions that could affect future operations. A valuable ship might be kept as an addition to the pirate fleet, but this required finding trustworthy crew members to sail it and increase the group's visibility to searching authorities. Lesser vessels might be stripped of useful equipment and then burned or sunk to eliminate evidence, but this destroyed potential value and created smoke that could be seen for miles. The treatment of captured crews often depended on their behavior during the attack and their potential usefulness to the pirates. Sailors who fought bravely might be respected and offered opportunities to join the pirate crew. Those who surrendered quickly might be viewed with suspicion as potential turncoats. Crew members with specialized skills like navigation, carpentry, or medicine were often pressed into service, regardless of their preferences. Navigation in hostile waters required skills that went beyond simple seamanship to include intelligence gathering, strategic planning, and political awareness. Pirates had to know which ports were friendly, which governors could be bribed, which naval commanders were active in specific areas, and how political changes in distant capitals might affect local conditions. Charts and maps were precious possessions that could mean the difference between success and disaster, but they were often inaccurate, outdated, or deliberately misleading. Pirates had to develop their own knowledge of local conditions through experience, observation, and information gathered from other sailors, merchants, and coastal inhabitants. Weather prediction became a survival skill that required constant attention to atmospheric conditions, seasonal patterns, and local geographical features that influenced climate. The ability to predict storms, wind changes, or calm periods could provide crucial advantages in planning attacks, escapes, or defensive positions. The maintenance of ships and equipment in hostile waters required improvisation and creativity that would challenge modern mechanics and engineers. Repairs had to be made with whatever materials were available, often under dangerous conditions that allowed little time for careful work. A mast damaged in battle might need emergency repairs using pieces of another ship's rigging, while hull damage might be patched with canvas and tar until proper facilities could be reached. Medical care in hostile waters was even more primitive than normal shipboard medicine, as wounds had to be treated quickly and with minimal supplies while the ship continued operations. Men wounded in battle might have to continue fighting if their injuries weren't immediately incapacitating, leading to complications that proper treatment might have prevented. The psychological stress of operating constantly in hostile waters wore on crews over time, creating tensions and problems that could be more dangerous than external enemies. Men who lived under constant threat of sudden death or capture sometimes developed emotional problems that affected their judgment and reliability. The isolation from normal human contact and the absence of legitimate social relationships created psychological strains that few people in conventional society ever experienced. Some pirates developed superstitions and rituals that provided psychological comfort even when they offered no practical protection. Lucky charms, specific routines, or elaborate ceremonies might help individuals cope with stress and uncertainty, though these practices could also create additional problems if they interfered with practical operations. The bonds between crew members became more intense under constant pressure, creating loyalties that could transcend family relationships, but also rivalries that could explode into deadly violence. Men who depended on each other for survival sometimes found their relationships complicated by competition for resources, status, or the attention of leaders. As you rest tonight in whatever safety your ship can provide, remember that tomorrow will bring new challenges that will test every skill you've developed and every relationship you've built. The hostile waters never become truly friendly, but experienced pirates learn to read their moods and navigate their dangers with skills that landlubbers couldn't imagine developing. The art of survival in these waters isn't just about fighting and sailing. It's about understanding human nature, reading situations quickly, making decisions with incomplete information, and maintaining hope when circumstances seem hopeless. These skills serve pirates well, not just in their criminal careers, but in whatever legitimate futures they might eventually pursue. The twilight years of the Golden Age of Piracy creep upon you like the subtle changes in season that mark the end of summer, barely noticeable at first, then undeniably present in every aspect of daily life. The waters that once seemed endless with opportunity now feel increasingly constricted by naval patrols, international cooperation, and political changes that make the old ways of operating progressively more dangerous and less profitable. You notice the changes in the small details first. Ports that once welcomed pirates with knowing winks and open arms now ask uncomfortable questions about cargo sources and ship registrations. Merchants who previously negotiated readily for stolen goods now demand documentation that pirates can't provide. Colonial officials who once accepted modest bribes to look the other way now require payments so large that they eliminate most profit from successful raids. The international situation has shifted in ways that gradually strangle pirate operations without dramatic confrontations or decisive battles. Treaties between European powers have eliminated many of the conflicts that created markets for privateers and legal cover for attacking enemy shipping. The wars that once provided both justification and opportunity for maritime violence have given way to periods of peace that redefine pirates as criminals rather than irregular combatants. Naval technology and tactics have evolved to counter pirate advantages that once seemed insurmountable. Purpose-built anti-piracy vessels sacrifice cargo capacity for speed and maneuverability, allowing them to pursue pirates into shallow waters and narrow channels that previously provided sanctuary. Improved communications networks allow authorities to coordinate responses more effectively, while better intelligence gathering helps naval forces anticipate pirate movements and concentrate defensive efforts where they'll be most effective. The economic foundations that supported pirate operations have eroded as legitimate commerce develops more efficient and secure methods for transporting valuable goods. Convoy systems reduce the number of isolated targets available for attack, while insurance companies provide incentives for merchants to invest in better security measures. The Spanish treasure fleets that once provided the ultimate prizes have become so well defended and carefully routed that attacking them requires resources and coordination beyond the capability of most pirate groups. Your own crew shows the wear and tear of operating in an increasingly hostile environment. Men who once joined freely now have to be recruited through deception or coercion, as the romantic appeal of piracy fades in the face of mounting evidence that the profession leads to early death or capture. The quality of new recruits has declined as experienced sailors find better opportunities in legitimate maritime trades that have expanded to meet growing colonial demands. The ships available to pirates reflect the changing economics of their profession. The best vessels are now too well defended to capture easily, while lesser ships provide inadequate returns to justify the risks involved in taking them. Pirates find themselves sailing increasingly marginal vessels that require constant maintenance and offer limited capability for both fighting and cargo capacity. The financial calculations that once favored piracy have shifted as the costs of operation increase while potential returns decrease. Supplies cost more in ports where pirates are no longer welcome, while the need for secrecy and security adds overhead that reduces net profits from successful raids. The bribes required to operate in remaining friendly ports have increased exponentially as officials demand compensation for the growing risks they face by harboring criminals. Some of your former companions have already recognized the changing reality and sought pardons or amnesty programs that allow them to transition back to legitimate society. These arrangements, offered by various colonial governments, provide alternatives to the traditional choice between piracy and death, though they often require accepting substantial penalties and restrictions that many pirates find difficult to tolerate. The psychological impact of these changes affects crew morale and decision-making in ways that create additional dangers. Men, who once faced dangers with confidence born of success, now approach each situation with the wariness of people who understand that the odds have turned against them. This defensive mindset can become self-fulfilling, as cautious pirates miss opportunities while still being caught by increasingly effective anti-piracy operations. The intelligence networks that once provided pirates with crucial information about shipping schedules, cargo values, and naval movements have been compromised by authorities who have learned to use the same networks for counterintelligence operations. Information that pirates receive may be deliberately false, designed to lead them into traps or away from legitimate opportunities. The political climate has shifted as colonial populations grow and develop economic interests that conflict with piracy's disruptive effects on commerce. Merchants, planters, and other colonial elites who once tolerated or even supported piracy now view it as a threat to their prosperity and security. These influential groups pressure colonial governments to take stronger action against pirates, while also supporting naval expansion and international cooperation against maritime crime. Religious and moral attitudes toward piracy have hardened as society becomes more settled and prosperous. Behavior that might have been overlooked or even admired during periods of economic hardship and political chaos now seems increasingly unacceptable to populations that have developed alternatives to criminal activity. Pirates find themselves viewed not as romantic rebels, but as obstacles to legitimate progress and development. The legal framework surrounding piracy has become more sophisticated and comprehensive, closing loopholes that once provided escape routes for captured pirates. International agreements allow for the extradition of pirates between jurisdictions, while improved record-keeping makes it harder for criminals to disappear into new identities or locations. Some crews attempt to adapt by shifting their operations to more remote areas where naval presence remains minimal, but these regions often offer fewer profitable targets and present additional challenges related to supply, communication, and escape routes. The geographic scope of effective pirate operations continues to shrink as authorities extend their reach into previously ungoverned waters. Others try to transition into quasi-legitimate activities like smuggling or black market trading that offer lower profits but also reduced risks compared to traditional piracy. These hybrid operations require different skills and relationships than straightforward robbery, forcing pirates to develop new expertise while competing with established networks that have superior resources and connections. The aging of successful pirates creates additional pressures as men who have survived long enough to accumulate wealth and experience find themselves less capable of the physical demands that their profession requires. Unlike legitimate careers that might offer opportunities for advancement into management or advisory roles, piracy provides few options for senior practitioners who can no longer perform the dangerous work that generates income. The question of retirement planning becomes urgent for pirates who recognize that their career has limited time remaining. The traditional options buried treasure, investment in legitimate businesses, or simply enjoying wealth until it's exhausted. All present significant challenges in an environment where authorities are increasingly effective at tracking down and confiscating criminal assets. Some pirates attempt to negotiate individual pardons or amnesty deals that would allow them to keep portions of their accumulated wealth in exchange for abandoning criminal activities. These negotiations are complex and dangerous, as they require trusting authorities who have every incentive to arrest pirates, regardless of any agreements that might be reached. The social networks that connected pirates across the Caribbean have fragmented as crews are destroyed, captured, or disbanded. The informal communication systems that once allowed coordination between different pirate groups have been compromised or eliminated, leaving surviving pirates increasingly isolated and vulnerable to authorities who can concentrate their efforts against smaller, less connected groups. The cultural legacy of the Golden Age of Piracy begins to shift from lived reality to romantic memory, as the last practicing pirates find themselves representing a way of life that no longer offers viable opportunities for new practitioners. The stories, songs, and traditions that defined pirate culture become historical artifacts rather than living practices. Weather patterns and seasonal changes that once provided predictable opportunities for pirate operations become less relevant as shipping patterns adapt to avoid traditional pirate hunting grounds, and as naval patrols become more consistent year-round. The natural rhythms that pirates once exploited for tactical advantages no longer provide the same opportunities. As you contemplate the future from your hammock tonight, you're aware that you may be among the last generation to experience the particular form of freedom and danger that defined the Golden Age of Piracy. The world is changing in ways that will make your chosen profession increasingly obsolete, replaced by more organized forms of crime, or eliminated entirely by more effective law enforcement. Yet there's something poignant about being present for the end of an era, even one that caused so much suffering and chaos. The skills you've developed, the relationships you've formed, and the experiences you've survived will remain with you regardless of what future you choose. The adaptability that allowed you to thrive as a pirate may serve you well in whatever legitimate career you eventually pursue. The sea remains as vast and mysterious as ever, but the human societies that border it have evolved beyond the point where small groups of armed men can operate with impunity along its edges. The Golden Age of Piracy is ending not with dramatic battles or decisive defeats, but with the quiet efficiency of economic and political changes that make piracy progressively less viable until it simply fades away. As another Caribbean dawn breaks over waters that have witnessed so much violence, adventure, and human drama, you find yourself in a contemplative mood that comes to those who have lived long enough to see the patterns that connect individual moments into larger stories. The life you've chosen, or that circumstances chose for you, has provided experiences that few people in any era could imagine, but it has also extracted prices that continue to accumulate with compound interest that no earthly wealth can repay. The face that looks back at you from still water during moments of calm reflection shows the accumulated impact of years spent under tropical sun, exposed to salt spray, and subjected to stresses that age human flesh faster than calendar time. Your hands tell stories through scars, calluses, and missing digits that map your personal history of violence, accident, and adaptation. Each mark represents a moment when survival balanced on the edge of a blade, a rope, or a decision that could have ended differently. Your skills have evolved far beyond what any formal education could have provided, shaped by necessities that demanded constant learning or inevitable death. You can read weather signs that would be invisible to landlubbers, navigate by stars and currents that city dwellers never notice, and assess human character through subtle cues that escape those who haven't learned that misreading people can be fatal. These abilities represent a form of education that no university could provide, though it came at costs that no tuition could measure. The relationships you've formed exist in categories that conventional society doesn't recognize. Bonds forged in shared danger that transcend normal friendship, loyalties tested by circumstances that reveal character more clearly than years of peaceful acquaintance, and enmities born from betrayals that cut deeper than ordinary conflicts because they involved matters of life and death. Some of your former companions are dead, claimed by violence, disease, accident, or the simple wear and tear of a life that demands more from human bodies than they were designed to provide. Their memories remain vivid because crisis situations create more intense recollections than routine experiences. You remember not just their faces, but the specific moments when their courage, cowardice, humor, or desperation revealed the essence of who they were, beneath whatever masks they wore during calmer times. Others have disappeared into fates that you can only guess, captured and executed, retired to hidden locations, or transformed into different people whose current lives bear no resemblance to their pirate past. The absence of formal record-keeping in pirate society means that former companions vanish as completely as if they had never existed, leaving only memories that grow less reliable with time and repetition. A few have successfully transitioned to legitimate lives, using skills developed through piracy to build respectable careers in seamanship, trade, or other maritime professions. These success stories provide hope, but also highlight the challenges of carrying a criminal past while trying to build a legal future. The need for secrecy about previous activities creates isolation that prevents former pirates from sharing experiences that shape their identities in fundamental ways. The wealth you've accumulated represents both achievement and burden, as every coin carries memories of how it was obtained and knowledge of the risks that were undertaken to acquire it. Money that could provide comfort and security in legitimate society becomes complicated when its source would make possession evidence of capital crimes. The practical challenges of converting stolen goods into usable wealth pale beside the psychological complexity of enjoying prosperity that was built on others' suffering. The moral questions that seemed simple during the heat of action become more complex during quiet moments when immediate survival doesn't dominate every thought. The merchants whose ships you've taken were often ordinary people trying to make honest livings, while the passengers who paid ransoms for their freedom were sometimes individuals whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. These realizations don't necessarily lead to guilt or regret, but they do create awareness that the world is more complicated than the simple equations of predator and prey that govern immediate survival situations. The political and social changes that have gradually made piracy less viable also force reevaluation of choices that once seemed natural and inevitable. Alternative paths that weren't available when you first turned to piracy have opened through economic development, political stabilization, and social evolution. The knowledge that legitimate opportunities now exist where none existed before creates complex feelings about time spent in criminal activities that once represented the only available options. Your understanding of human nature has been shaped by observing people under stresses that reveal their true character more clearly than years of conventional social interaction. You've seen courage and cowardice, generosity and selfishness, loyalty and betrayal displayed in their purest forms by people who had no time for pretense or self-deception. This knowledge creates both cynicism about human motivations and appreciation for those individuals who maintain their principles even when circumstances would excuse abandoning them. The physical toll of pirate life has accumulated in ways that will affect whatever years remain to you, regardless of future choices about career and lifestyle. Injuries that were ignored or improperly treated during active periods have developed into chronic problems that modern medicine could address, but 18th century remedies could only endure. The wear and tear on joints, muscles, and organs subjected to tropical diseases, poor nutrition, and constant stress has created a body that feels older than its chronological age. The psychological adaptations that allowed survival in dangerous and unpredictable environments may not serve as well in whatever peaceful future you might pursue. Hypervigilance that was essential for avoiding threats could become paranoia that interferes with normal social relationships. The quick decision-making that meant the difference between life and death might translate into impatience with deliberate processes that characterize legitimate business and social activities. Sleep patterns, disrupted by years of irregular watches and crisis responses, may never fully normalize, leaving you permanently estranged from the rest cycles that govern conventional society. Dreams populated by memories of violence and danger can make rest elusive, even when external circumstances provide complete safety and comfort. The isolation from family connections that allowed complete commitment to pirate brotherhood has created gaps that may be impossible to bridge, even if opportunities for reunion arise. Parents, siblings, or other relatives who might still be alive have continued their lives without you, developing relationships and experiencing changes that you haven't shared. The person who returns from years of piracy is fundamentally different from the one who left, while those left behind have also evolved in ways that might make reconnection difficult or impossible. The cultural knowledge you've acquired through contact with different societies, languages, and customs represents one of the more positive legacies of your pirate career. Few people in your era have had opportunities to observe and participate in as many different cultures as those who sailed throughout the Caribbean, trading and fighting with Spanish, French, English, Dutch, and indigenous populations. This multicultural perspective could prove valuable in whatever future you choose to pursue. The leadership and teamwork skills developed through pirate democracy and collective survival could translate into legitimate management and organizational abilities, though explaining their source would require creativity and discretion. The ability to motivate people under pressure, to make decisions with incomplete information, and to maintain group cohesion during crisis situations are talents that many employers would value if they could be divorced from their criminal origins. The geographic knowledge gained through years of Caribbean navigation represents practical expertise that could support careers in legitimate maritime trades. Though demonstrating this knowledge without revealing its source would require careful management of personal history. The familiarity with ports, weather patterns, and local conditions throughout the region could make you valuable to merchants, governments, or other organizations requiring such specialized information. As you contemplate whatever future awaits beyond the pirate life that has defined your adult years, you carry forward both assets and liabilities that will shape whatever comes next. The experiences that have traumatized and hardened you have also educated and strengthened you in ways that few people achieve through conventional paths. The question becomes whether the lessons learned through danger and illegality can be applied to pursuits that serve society rather than preying upon it. The sea that has been your home and highway for so many years will remain constant regardless of human choices about how to interact with it. The same winds that filled pirate sails can power merchant vessels or naval ships committed to protecting rather than threatening commerce. The same waters that witnessed pirate raids can carry legitimate trade that builds prosperity rather than redistributing it through violence. Tonight, as you listen to the familiar sounds of your floating world, consider that these may be among the last times you hear them as a pirate. The end of an era approaches, not just for piracy in general, but potentially for your personal involvement in this dangerous and remarkable way of life. Tomorrow's sunrise could illuminate the beginning of a completely different chapter in your story. I hope these reflections on a life lived outside conventional boundaries have given you some peace as you rest in your own comfortable circumstances. We're nearing the end of our journey together through this fascinating and harsh historical period. What aspects of this pirate's life have resonated most strongly with you? Drop a comment below and let me know what you'll remember from this historical adventure. The evening light casts long shadows across water that reflects not just the present moment, but the accumulated memories of a life spent navigating between freedom and survival, between brotherhood and betrayal, between the romance of adventure and the harsh reality of choices that could never be unmade. As this particular chapter of the Golden Age of Piracy draws to its close, there's a profound sense of finality that extends beyond individual stories to encompass the end of an entire way of life. The harbor ahead represents more than just a geographic destination. It symbolizes the transition point where pirates must choose between continuing a profession that grows more dangerous with each passing season or finding ways to transform themselves into something different, something that can exist within the evolving boundaries of legitimate society. This choice, forced upon them by changing times rather than personal preference, requires letting go of identities that were forged in danger and shaped by experiences that most people could never comprehend. The physical act of entering a harbor for what might be the last time as a pirate carries emotional weight that transforms routine navigation into a ceremony of closure. The familiar process of reading wind and current, of adjusting sail and steering for the safest approach, becomes laden with significance, as each action might represent the end of a skill set that defined your existence for years or decades. The crew around you faces the same transition with individual responses that reflect their unique circumstances and personalities. Some embrace the prospect of retirement or legitimate employment as liberation from constant danger and moral ambiguity. Others view the end of the pirate era as a personal catastrophe that strips away everything that gave their lives meaning and excitement. Most fall somewhere between these extremes, experiencing complex mixtures of relief and regret, hope and fear, anticipation and nostalgia. The conversations that take place during these final days of shared pirate life carry unusual intensity as men attempt to process experiences that have no equivalent in conventional society. Stories that have been told and retold acquire new significance as historical documents rather than entertainment, while practical advice about navigation, combat, and survival becomes legacy knowledge that may have no future application, but represents the accumulated wisdom of a vanishing culture. The distribution of final spoils follows the same democratic principles that governed earlier treasure divisions, but with awareness that this may be the last time such procedures are followed. The mathematical calculations that determine each man's share carry emotional weight beyond their financial value, as they represent the final accounting of years spent in shared danger and mutual dependence. Some crew members have already made arrangements for their post-pirate futures, pardons negotiated with colonial authorities, legitimate employment opportunities identified through contacts and connections, or simply plans to disappear into new identities that bear no resemblance to their criminal pasts. Others face uncertainty about what comes next, possessing skills and experiences that are valuable but difficult to translate into acceptable civilian occupations. The ship itself, which has been home, workplace, and fortress for so long, faces an uncertain future that mirrors the crew's situation. Some vessels might be sold to legitimate buyers after careful modification to eliminate evidence of their pirate history. Others might be abandoned or scuttled, their destruction representing the final elimination of evidence that could connect former pirates to their criminal activities. The weapons that have been constant companions throughout your pirate career now become problematic possessions that must be carefully disposed of or hidden. Cutlasses, pistols, and other implements of violence that were essential tools for survival become potential evidence that could be used against you if your past is ever investigated. Yet, parting with them feels like abandoning pieces of your identity that were earned through danger and validated through survival. Personal possessions accumulated during years of piracy present similar challenges, as items that carry deep emotional significance might also serve as evidence of criminal activity. Jewelry taken from prizes, exotic goods acquired during trading expeditions, and souvenirs collected during adventures all become problematic when viewed from the perspective of authorities seeking to identify and prosecute former pirates. The process of saying goodbye to companions who will scatter to different destinations and different futures lacks the formal ceremonies that mark transitions in conventional society. There are no graduation exercises or retirement parties for pirates, just the gradual dissolution of relationships that were intense but temporary, meaningful but dangerous to maintain once the bonds of mutual criminality are broken. Some farewells are permanent, as former crew members understand that contact with each other could compromise whatever new lives they manage to build. Others maintain carefully limited communication through intermediaries or coded messages, preserving connections while minimizing risks to everyone involved. A few former pirates might eventually reunite in legitimate circumstances, but such reunions would require years of careful rebuilding of trust and circumstances. The transformation from pirate to civilian requires more than simply changing occupations. It demands fundamental alterations in identity, behavior, and worldview that challenge every aspect of personality that was shaped by years of illegal activity. The hypervigilance that kept you alive during pirate operations must be consciously suppressed to avoid attracting attention in peaceful settings. The quick resort to violence that was essential for survival must be replaced by patience and negotiation that feel alien and dangerous to someone accustomed to settling disputes through force. Social skills that were never necessary during pirate life must be developed through trial and error that could expose former criminals to suspicion and investigation. The ability to maintain casual conversations without revealing incriminating information, to participate in community activities without displaying knowledge that would be suspicious in legitimate citizens, and to build relationships based on partial truths rather than complete honesty, all require talents that many former pirates struggle to master. Financial management presents unique challenges for people who accumulated wealth through illegal means and now must find ways to use it without attracting attention from authorities or criminals who might see former pirates as valuable targets. The conversion of treasure into legitimate assets requires expertise that few pirates possessed, while the need for secrecy limits access to professional advice that could help navigate complex financial and legal requirements. The psychological adjustment to civilian life proves difficult for many former pirates who had adapted to constant excitement and danger. The routine nature of legitimate employment can feel stifling to people accustomed to the variety and intensity of criminal adventures. The slow pace of legal progress and conventional decision-making processes can frustrate former pirates who learn to act quickly and decisively in life or death situations. Some former pirates find satisfaction in maritime careers that allow them to use their seagoing skills in legitimate contexts: merchant marine service, fishing, or even naval careers for those who can conceal their criminal pasts sufficiently. These occupations provide familiar environments while offering the security and respectability that piracy never provided. Others discover talents and interests that were suppressed during their criminal careers, but emerge once survival is no longer the primary consideration. Former pirates have become merchants, craftsmen, farmers, and even clergy, using skills developed through adversity to build new lives that contribute positively to their communities. The families that former pirates attempt to rebuild or reconnect with face their own challenges in accepting people whose pasts cannot be fully revealed or discussed. Wives, children, and parents who may have suffered during the pirates' absence must learn to trust individuals whose recent histories are partially or completely hidden. The emotional walls that were necessary for survival during pirate operations must be carefully dismantled to allow intimate relationships that require vulnerability and honesty. Religious conversion or spiritual awakening becomes important for some former pirates who seek redemption for actions that violated moral codes they had abandoned but never completely forgotten. The process of seeking forgiveness from divine sources, from victims, and from themselves provides a framework for psychological healing that helps bridge the gap between criminal pasts and legitimate futures. Community integration requires former pirates to contribute positively to societies they may have previously viewed only as sources of wealth to be exploited. The transition from predator to productive citizen demands fundamental changes in perspective that go beyond mere behavioral modification to encompass complete reorientation of values and goals. The legacy of the Golden Age of Piracy will live on in stories, songs, and cultural memories that romanticize experiences that were far harsher than popular imagination suggests. The real pirates who survived this era will carry forward knowledge and perspectives that shaped them in ways that no other experience could replicate. But they will also bear scars, physical, emotional, and psychological, that will never completely heal. As your ship makes its final approach to whatever harbor represents the end of your pirate career, you carry forward both the assets and liabilities that this extraordinary life has created. The skills, knowledge, and resilience that allowed you to survive and sometimes thrive in one of history's most dangerous professions will serve you well in whatever future you choose to create. The relationships, experiences, and memories that defined your pirate years will remain with you always, providing both strength and burden as you navigate the challenges of building a legitimate life. The sea itself will continue its eternal rhythms regardless of human decisions about how to interact with it. The same waters that carried pirate ships can bear legitimate commerce that builds rather than destroys, protects rather than threatens, and serves society rather than preying upon it. The winds that filled pirate sails can power vessels engaged in honest trade, exploration, and communication that connect rather than divide human communities. The sunset that marks the end of this day, and perhaps the end of your pirate career, paints the sky with colors that have inspired sailors throughout history. Tomorrow's sunrise will illuminate new possibilities that were unavailable when you first turned to piracy as the only alternative to desperation. The choice of what to do with those possibilities rests entirely with you, shaped by experiences that few people have survived, but not limited by a past that no longer defines your only options. As we reach the end of our journey together through this remarkable period of history, take a moment to reflect on the complexity of human nature when faced with impossible choices and extreme circumstances. The pirates of the Golden Age were neither the romantic heroes of popular fiction nor the simple criminals of legal documents, but complex individuals who responded to their circumstances with courage, creativity, and resilience that we can admire even when we cannot approve of their choices. Rest well, knowing that the stories of these remarkable people have found safe harbor in your memory, where they can provide perspective on your own challenges and inspiration for facing whatever storms life might bring your way. The pirates are gone, but their legacy of adaptability, courage, and the refusal to accept defeat in the face of overwhelming odds remains as relevant today as it was 3 centuries ago. And so our historical voyage comes to a peaceful close. The pirate ships have furled their sails for the final time, their crews have scattered to fates both known and unknown, and the golden age of piracy has passed into memory and legend. But the human capacity for survival, adaptation, and transformation that these stories represent continues in every person who faces difficult circumstances with determination and hope. Sleep well, dear listeners. May your dreams be filled with calm seas and fair winds, and may you wake refreshed and ready for whatever adventures your own life might bring. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time, and remember, there are always more stories waiting to be discovered in the vast ocean of human history. Until next time, this is your guide through the past, wishing you peaceful rest and pleasant dreams. Don't forget to like this video if it helped you unwind, subscribe for more historical journeys, and sweet dreams to you all, wherever you may be listening around our beautiful world.